Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning to all the folks on Zoom land. We're so glad you can all join us this morning for the beginning of our Stewardship 2024 series, Hope Rising. For our first presentation this morning, we have the Reverend David Roschke. He'll be leading a discussion on Biblical Stewardship 101. There are handouts on your seats. If you don't seem to be in a seat where there's a handout, let me know. I try to make sure that there are handouts in every seat. And so without further ado, I will let David begin this discussion this morning. At the very end, stay tuned. We have a nice little I Love Lucy video. If we have time.
Always time for this.
Yeah, let's see. It's good to be with you and to be able to have a chance to talk a little bit about stewardship. I was asked to do a kind of 101 on what does the Bible say about stewardship. So that's what I put together, a chance to think basics about biblical stewardship. So I prepared an outline for you that you have, and I will just kind of go through the outline with comments. But the heart of understanding Christian stewardship in the Bible is to understand that everything is from God. We nod and we say, yeah, that all makes sense. But you know how we live. We live as though it's ours. And maybe we'll share a little bit for God's purposes, but it's really ours. We've worked hard for it. Maybe we've even earned it. Maybe we received it by grace, but it's ours, and it's ours to determine. And the other biblical understanding is that everything that we have comes from God. It's God's, and we are the stewards. We are the managers. We say we have time, we have talents, we have treasures. Those three categories kind of cover all of the gifts that God has and which are bestowed to us to manage. The time that we have, that's the time that's equal among all of us. The talents that we have, the gifts, the abilities, the skills that we have, that varies widely from all of us. The financial means that, excuse me. Sorry. I've got another alarm that's going to go off in a minute.
That was yours.
I'm sorry. It's really time to start my cuckoo clock. I am sorry. Excuse me. So we have these gifts, the time, the talents, the treasures. The treasures are everything else that we have, all the material things that are ours. And we remember that wonderful offertory prayer. There are signs of your gracious love. We pray it, we say it over and again, but it needs to be deeply a part of us, that we understand that all comes from God and is for our use, for our care, for our management. Worship itself is an offering. I sometimes like to imagine what it was like for Abraham and Sarah long ago. How did they give their offerings? How did they give their tithes? Built an altar, had some rock, and they brought the tenth, the tithe. And the tenth wasn't the leftovers. The tenth, remember, the tithe was the first fruits, the harvest, the best of the grain. They had 10 bushels of grain, and they brought 1 bushel of grain, and it was the offering. They had 90 goats, and they picked the 9 best and offered them as a sacrifice. They were the offering. So our worship itself is our offering, and it's always the first fruits. It's always off the top. It's not the leftovers. When we start managing what we have, and we think about all the things, all the responsibilities we have, all of the different areas where our money goes, for example, and what's left over, maybe that becomes our gift in many ways. But that's not the biblical understanding of what we do with our gifts. It's first fruits. I still remember my dad. I learned stewardship from my father was pastor. I remember as a child once going into the bedroom, and he had just been paid, and on the bed he had these piles of money. And it was back long ago, and I guess, I don't know, it was all cash, and I guess he and mom put it in envelopes. But he explained to me what the various piles were. The first pile was our offering, was our 10%, and that would go to the offerings of the church. There was another one for food. There was another one for other expenses, and so he had about 6 piles of money, and I've never forgotten that. I don't know what they did with it. I don't know if they put it in envelopes and used it during that, but long ago it was. But the powerful part for me was this first pile, this first one, and he made clear to me that was the 10th was the first fruits, as it were. We give to the Lord. Giving is living. Giving is our thanks to God. Sometimes say there's no living without giving. As we give, it's refreshing. It's invigorating. It's living. Giving is this is my Jennifer, my personal experience, but somehow as we give, it always seems to be replaced. We wonder how it's going to work. I'm thinking especially of financial gifts now. How is this going to work? Every time we fill out our pledge, like we got ours filled out for turning in today for next year, and how are we going to do this? And it always works out. It always has. We're 49 years of marriage now, and we've been tithing from the beginning in our financial stewardship, and it always somehow, I don't know how it works, but it does. It's always worked out. It's always replaced, kind of like when we give blood. We're blood donors, and it's always wonderful to give blood, and it's always replaced, and you can't outgive God. Giving is healthy. It's remember the prayer, it's right and salutary that we should at all times and in all places give thanks. We say in the preface to our communion liturgy. Not giving, I've said, and I thought I'd just share it with you, it's not giving is a kind of spiritual constipation. We're blocked up. It's not good for us. When people get out of sorts, even get angry at in congregation stewardship time, my experience was it was not always a pleasant time. People even sometimes disappeared during stewardship time. They didn't want to talk, and I was worried, especially about those people that come back in Advent again or after Thanksgiving, and then everything was fine again. But it was and I always felt badly. And it's a part of your spiritual life that's not fluid and rolling. One other really important piece, and that is that giving of money or giving of anything is not part of our justification. Clear understanding, and for Lutherans, in that what makes us right with God, it's not what we do. It is God's gift. It is God's grace that justifies us. So why do we do this? We do this because we have responsibilities. We are caretakers. Second part, stewardship is at the heart of Christian life. This kind of talk too, I sometimes say is kind of family talk. It's for those of us who are part of the community of faith. It's difficult to talk to strangers who are not people of faith about these kinds of things. I always kind of imagine that the best stewardship talks, we're doing it here in a class together, but the best time is around a kitchen. Well, our family, when we have our family talks, they would happen around the kitchen table, and where we would gather. It was our regular meal place, and this is that kind of talk. And I think this today, we're kind of sharing, frankly, with you about things that I've understood, come to understand about what it means to be a Christian steward, and it's family talk. It makes sense to us who are people of faith. When we get our money into perspective, this is talking just about the treasures part, but money is a big thing, especially for us who are North American Christians or Western Christians. Money is an important part of our life, but when we get that into perspective, when we understand, who we are in relationship to our money and what the money is, and what our means is, much of the rest of Christian life seems to fall in place. I've known some really wonderful stewards in my life, people at least who I regard not just generous, but they carefully cared for what they had, and they're, in my experience, they're always joyful Christians. they are joyful people of faith, because there's something about when you understand how to use well what God has entrusted us with, that the rest of life comes together. I mentioned biblical steward, manager, is a caretaker, a trustee. Some of the attorneys may say I've really oversimplified trusteeship, but for me, trusteeship is party A, party B, and party C. Party A entrusts to party B, who is the trustee, what really goes to party C. And party B will be well taken care of. Party B will have everything, the trustee will have everything that the trustee needs, but it's really important that party B, the trustee, understands that what is being cared for is not for party B, it's for party C. In Christian stewardship, it's important for us to understand, as we started out, that everything we have comes from party A, is from God, is God's gift to us. We manage and care for it, but we always understand and realize that the party C, those who come after us, receive how we care for what we have. That's our material things, that's our world, that's the church, that's our congregation, it's all that God has entrusted to us. And so we are party B, always remembering that we pass it on to party C. Sometimes say stewardship and evangelism are kind of essentials of Christian life and community, that much of what we do in the church could be kind of put under those old categories of stewardship, that is how we manage what has been given to us, and evangelism, which is literally sharing the gospel, living the gospel, serving with the gospel, using and doing well with what we have. Stewardship and evangelism are kind of at the heart of our community and what we do together as God's people. Another thought, just a bunch of stuff. It's liberating to be free of greed and fear and worry and good stewardship. That is, understanding God will give us everything we need, we party B, to manage and care for. And when we're free of it, we don't have to worry. We'll have what we need, and everything that we have is then passed on to party C. Good stewardship is faith in action. Do you know the story of Ivan the Terrible? Do you remember that Ivan the Terrible decided to be baptized and took his troops in, but they were baptized, they wanted to be baptized with their swords. They took their swords out and they held their swords, they went into the water. They held their swords out of the water because they didn't want their swords to be Christianized, to be baptized. I always thought that image, kind of, sometimes I wonder if it fits, I don't have a billfold, I have credit cards, but if it kind of fits what we do sometimes with our money and with what we have, it's kind of like baptize me, but this is mine. These are the things that I have. So we hold our wallets and our purses out. Okay. Other thoughts. Stewardship is different from fundraising. Really critical piece. Fundraising and stewardship are both good and necessary, but biblical stewardship has nothing to do with meeting a budget or fundraising goals. Do you hear me on that? Stewardship is important. Fundraising sometimes is important. But what we're talking about here, that's why I always, in congregation, congregation wants to match up stewardship budgets and things with the budget, and finally it has to do that. But our stewardship is thinking about what we have and how we are caretakers, trustees, managers of what God has given to us. And finally, it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not we make the congregational budget. So I would say a letter that goes out from the pastor and says we need extra money to make it to the end of the year. That's actually not stewardship. That's fundraising. When we build a building or have a big project or something special and we need funds for that, that's fundraising. And we kind of divvy things up, and we see, what's everybody's share. We have all kinds of different categories, and which category are you going to be in? That's fundraising. What we're talking about today, and understanding good Christian and biblical stewardship, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with what God has entrusted to us and how we use what we have for God's purposes. We need to keep teaching one another too. We need to keep talking one another and reminding one another that, stewardship and fundraising are different. Okay, so what are the principles? I've kind of narrowed it down, and we've already talked about some principles, like that everything comes from God. Everything is God's gift to us, comes in God's grace to us. But what are the principles that we find scripturally? I've narrowed it down to 4. First one, really important, is proportional giving. And there are some text there. This is, by the way, a terrible way to do Bible study, because you can make the scriptures say whatever you want when you just pull out a passage here or there, and you have to kind of trust me that these make sense. But all these texts, those from Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Malachi, and Luke, are texts that have to do with using. But I turned it off. Using what we have according to what we receive. So the first passage is from Leviticus. All tithes from the land, whether from the seed of the ground or the fruit from the tree or the Lord's, they are holy to the Lord. All tithes of herd and flock, everything that passes under the shepherd's staff shall be holy to the Lord. So the tithes, that is the tenth, what comes, it is the Lord's, and it is holy. Remember what holy means. Holy is unique. Holy is like nothing else. It's divine. It is the tithe is the Lord's. Deuteronomy, these are from the Old Testament laws. All shall give as they are able. The Malachi text is another, and there are all sorts of these throughout the scriptures, and especially the Old Testament on the tithe. But Malachi is the one that's really interesting. Malachi, this is the last book of the Bible, of the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures. Will anyone rob God? Question. Yet you are robbing me. This is God talking. But you say, how are we robbing you? And the answer, in your tithes and your offerings. See, and then God says, see if I will not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down for you an overflowing blessing. But if not caring well for what we have in our tithes and offerings is actually, Malachi says, robbing from God. Luke 12.
I apologize, we had a technical issue, if you can kind of continue.
Okay, that we're now giving and we can give, and I encourage you to put something in the plate every time when the plate goes by, because it's our offerings.
They're in the pews already. They're in the
Right.
little thing where the visitor card is or whatever. You just fill it out
And it's really nice, you can put your name on it, and you can, and put it in the plate, but it's our offering, it's what we give, and we need to do that regularly. It's part of who we are as God's people. Givings are proportional according to what God has given to us in our time and our talents and our treasures, everything. We'll talk about that in a moment. But also regular, it's also sacrificial. Giving sometimes is a choice. It hurts a little bit, because when we decide, when we make our tithes and our offerings, it means that we can't do other things. We make choices with what we'll do. So maybe we won't have this car, but we'll have this car. Or maybe we won't do this trip, we'll do this trip, but we're also doing other things with those resources that we have. Well, there's a sacrifice. The text that I pulled out just to talk about it, the one is the obvious one, the story of the widow and her, remember who Jesus sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. For a widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. And he called his disciples and said to them, truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live. Powerful example and picture for us of a sacrifice, of a willing sacrifice, but a giving everything she has. The other text that's such an important one, Luke 12, again, Jesus saying, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So true. Where those things that are most important to us are, that's where our heart is. And if you want to find out, take a look at your credit card statement. We do it from time to time, where is everything going to? And we find out what's most important to us. And it's a great way to evaluate where our heart is, what's most important. So giving is proportional, it's regular, it's sacrificial, it's also joyful. And the passages that I pull out both from 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, the passage from 8 during the severe ordeal of affliction, Paul writes, their abundant joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. So in their joy and even in their poverty, they were generous. Or 2 Corinthians 9, each of you must give as you have made up your mind, not regretfully or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful gift. Giving is a joyful experience when we give the first fruits, when we give off the top, when we give everything that we can. Let me just pause there for a moment. And are there questions or comments?
Let me get the trusty mic out. And also, sorry, they're having bell ringer training.
Yes.
Mike, let's see. Mic test, 1, 2, mic test. Any questions this morning? Or comments?
We can come back around, but I just wanted to pause for a minute. Okay, let's talk about tithe. They say tithe is more than 10%. What do you mean by that? It is off the top. It is it's proportional giving. It's not the leftovers. Excuse me, I gotta figure out what's going on here. It's living life on the edge. The biblical tithes and offerings, I read you that passage from Malachi that referred to tithes and offerings. You know the difference? The tithes and offerings, the tithe, the 10% was the automatic, what was expected to return to God in worship. You gave your tithe, you gave your 10%. The offering is really what comes after that. So the tithe is not your offering, it's that's the biblical understanding of the tithe and offering. The offering is what comes in addition, beyond that. That's really your offering. The tithe is, you're expected to give in a sense. You give the tithe before the offering. The tithe is time honored and biblical. I made a comment too that my experience, and we can talk about this a little bit too, but I believe it's best to give the tithe to our local community of faith, our congregation, our congregations, our spiritual center. And here's why just as a pastor and talking with people about stewardship and things, what happens otherwise is we start playing with ways to kind of manipulate what we have. And if we don't give it to our congregation, we start dividing up the, well, I'll give 5% to the church, but then my mother-in-law's in assisted living now, and so I've got to do our share of that, and so that becomes that's a charity. We kind of regard it as a charity rather than our gift. And we start playing with these someone's in school, and we do all these things with our, and then we total up all these charities that we support, and we call it our tithe. The biblical understanding of the tithe is that it is for it is the what we do to show God that we understand who God is and we love God, and so it is our tithe, and our offering is beyond that. So we can talk some, but I just share that just from pastoral experience that I think it's a really important piece. But the tithe is important, and it's as I say, it's time honored, and it's been part of the people of faith in our Judeo-Christian heritage from the beginning. Some other stewardship thoughts. Stewardship principles, all these things that we're talking about, cut across. They are cut across our time and our talents and our treasure. And what that means is we don't trade one for the other. Well, this year I don't, we're finances are kind of tight, so we'll give a little more of our time and talents. No, we understand the biblical principles as they are, or the other way. In a congregation like ours, with lots of professionals and lots of, we don't have time and talents. I'm happy to give money. Okay, it's easier to do that. No, principles. Proportional, of regular, of sacrificial, of joyful giving, cut across all of us. It's what we do. The talents we have, do we use them proportionally? And do we manage them proportionally and joyfully and regularly and sacrificially? The time that we have, do we use it proportionally and regularly and sacrificially and joyfully? We're examples to one another. I mentioned that before, but I think it's really important, and in the Christian life that we share these things with one another, and that we because we're examples. I said my wake-up calls as a young pastor was years ago. We were just in a discussion. I had never, honestly, in seminary and things, I never had any class on stewardship or anything like that. What I've put together has been from my pastoral experience, and we just didn't didn't learn that, but my wake up was, I served a congregation in Stavanger, Norway. And it was the early part of the oil industry in Stavanger. And so we were just I was having a discussion with leaders, and somehow, as we were talking about service, said, you know, Jennifer and I, we made a commitment that we are tithers, and someone said, we know that, David. It's inspiring us. Well, I shared that. I didn't know anybody was paying attention to what we were. I mean, we're just giving. We're just putting our, in those days, checks in the offering, and but it was. They knew how little we had compared to what expatriates make, and so what the gist of it was that, you know, it was inspiring for them to see that Jennifer and I were giving a lot more, I suppose, than some of them were getting. So it was, so I share that to say, you know, we are examples. So parents, we need to teach our kids. We need to talk to one another. I have a comment there about leaders. I pulled that from something I shared with pastors a while back, but it works for congregational leaders, and all of us. If leaders are poor stewards, there are problems ahead. If leaders are not, and here's the deal, because if leaders don't tithe or don't give proportionally, don't give regularly, don't give sacrificially, don't give joyfully, it's impossible to talk to others about those things. I couldn't talk to you now if we weren't living this. And, you know, we actually give lots more than 10% and all kinds of other things, you know, with our tithes and offerings, and it's amazing, you know, the blessings that come from that, but it's, but if leaders can't talk about proportional, regular, sacrificial, joyful giving, if they're not living it themselves. Last point, stewardship time is an opportunity to remind people in our membership and friends that well, did I say that right? That our membership are our congregation's primary source of income. That's a kind of a new thing in the church, but in recent years, I've realized as back in the day, those of us who've been longtime Lutherans, most of the people in the church were Lutheran and kind of grown up in the church with us. Nowadays, we have wonderfully lots of people who are coming from other denominations and who are becoming part of the church. But in some of those denominations, particularly the Roman Catholic Church and sometimes some Episcopal churches and things, there are sources, there are other sources of funds that help do ministry. Our congregation is one, I mean, we have a few other sources too, but I think, at least as I understand the budget, most of our funding, am I not right? Here at Christ the King comes from our membership. It comes from our giving. And so we just have to say that. We have to let people know that because they assume sometimes that the bishop, you know, has got all kinds of money, and
I think so.
doesn't work that way in our colony and in our system. So we have to, stewardship time is an opportunity to share some of those kinds of things and to do them in a stewardship discussion, not a fundraising discussion either. So, thoughts, comments? Yes, Caleb.
1 second, let me get the, hello, there we go.
My phone's gonna make me nervous.
Here you go.
Well, my question is kind of two-part. Tithe always means 10%. Is that other question?
Biblical understanding of tithe was 10%.
Another question is 10% of what? Your take-home pay, your everything, including what you pay for taxes. I mean, what is the reasonable way to think about that? Or am I thinking too hard about that?
No. Well, I will just share. I mean, we all have to come to terms with this on our own. But for me, it is off the top. It's before taxes. It's, you know, it's what do you say, or what do you have in your mind? You know, what is your family income? And yet we all have an idea of, you know, what we have, and that's, you know, how much we make before taxes, not the take home, that's the leftovers. So it's off the top. That's a lot of money sometimes. We have, you know, we've been blessed in lots of ways, but that's how we calculate it, and I think that's an understanding of the biblical tithe. If you have discussions with people from other denominations and the like, and a lot of people take the tithe is simply, I mean, the tithe is kind of synonymous with your Sunday offering. Some churches I've learned that, and so it's but the biblical tithe is 10% off the top, first fruits. So like, you know, it's like, as I say, you know, Abraham has 150 sheep, and he chooses the 15 best sheep, not the lame ones, not the ones that are not going to make it anyway, but you pick the best ones and offer them up. It's the tithe. The offering comes after that. And then remember those passages, you know, that and it was a pleasing, fragrant offering to the Lord, you know, and the Lord was pleased with the smell. You know, it was that's how I've understood it.
Others, comments, questions?
Well, when you and all that, why are we so afraid to give that? What are the things that hold us back, and how does it deepen our faith when we get to that?
I think the number one piece is we don't teach it to one another. We don't have examples. Why that is, I don't know. I'm grateful for my parents. I mean, I learned tithing as a kid. That you know, on my allowance, my parents gave me an allowance, and you moved the decimal point 1 point, and that was your tithe, and so that was my offering. So I don't remember what I got, but 50 cents a week or something, you know, back in, which was a lot of money for me. I mean, you know, but move the decimal point when the nickel went into the offering every week. And in my congregations, we always encouraged children to tithe too. We had special pledge cards for time, talent, and treasure. And you know, you make commitments in this season of the year. Back in the day, it was this very Sunday, the second Sunday in November was the pledging Sunday across the Lutheran Church in America, our predecessor body. And that was the Sunday everyone brought their gifts, but we encouraged kids to do it too, because I always, you know, I learned from my parents teaching me those things, and so that helps. I don't know the fear. We hang on to what we have, so we don't even like to talk about it. So it makes us a little uncomfortable. So I don't know, you tell me what else, but the biggest thing I think is that we just don't share about these things, the joy of giving, and we need to. Frankly, we've been in this congregation now for 7 years. I don't think we've had in our 7 years. There's not been much, it's been interesting, much talk about this, at least that we've been part of in our years here. So I have a hunch there are a bunch of people in the congregation who've never heard some of these things. That's just a hunch.
And unfortunately.
So I want to address that from a non-pastor perspective. Okay. I think that there is a misnomer that money is evil and dirty. And to stay pure and represent God, quote unquote, we don't talk about them. And I'm a businesswoman, And I work with a lot of entrepreneurs on their mindset and the beliefs that they hold. Money is a huge problem for people to talk about. Because if we start talking about money, then it's kind of a base thing. And we attach a lot of value and worth in the business world to money. The more that you have, the more you worth. The better you are at your job, the more you have. And so I have a lot of conversations about money and wealth consciousness in the business world with people, breaking down these beliefs that we carry. And David, I agree with you. We don't talk about it. You know, we have one of the most misquoted Bible verses in the world, which is the root of all money is the root of all evil. And that's not the quote, it's the love of money is the root of all evil. And I was working with some folks this week and I said, as business owners, we have a responsibility to be the best we can at the business that we do and make the most money we possibly can so that we can affect change in the world. And a lot of people in my community are really hurting right now over the things that are happening in the world with the conflicts and the wars that are going on, and they feel helpless. And I offer to them that the more money they make, the more ability they have to affect change by contributing to organizations that are boots on the ground working in those areas. So they can directly contribute, but we don't talk about those things.
Also, I think money is a security blanket sometimes. I think money is a way to protect you could involve and do it for you that way. Because if you give to the parents, you give then you're accepting that there's a bigger power out there. The way you said, you know, we didn't know if we'd be able to give as much as we wanted to. We didn't know how we would make ends meet, but it always did. I think it forces the person to consciously accept God and someone who's going to help make ends meet or make it all the way through the earth.
Thank you for that.
All right, I got it. Tom, here you go. Please. I've taught Sunday school here for quite a few years, and at one point we actually did try having the kids every Sunday give something, but it sort of missed the mark. Hardly we didn't involve the parents, and the kids would come in, especially they wanted to have something to give, the parents would give them the nickel as they went into Sunday school, and wasn't really understanding that it should come from them. And so, it didn't really work out. It was something that I thought, we really should do, but we never really fully implemented that. Something that they really understood. Other than they understood, you give something to the church, but it wasn't really understanding that it's coming from them.
Well, we used to give reports, give a statement to the kids too. I mean, we spent more on postage sometimes to send it to them than they gave a penny a piece, or something. But that was okay. We were teaching principles, and so I felt good about that. I just asked about pastoral stuff. I am a cold turkey tither, pastor. What I mean by that is our old predecessor body, the Lutheran Church in America, had a big stewardship. It had some really excellent stewardship stuff, but one of the things they really encouraged was growth giving, they called it. And that meant every year you give a little more. I have to say, in all of my years, I'm sure there are some people who have done that, but I only know one person who did that. And he told me it after I said, I don't know anybody who's ever done it. And he said, he pulled me aside and he said, Pastor, I did it. And that's how we got to where we are. And so a person, but I think for most people, that growth giving, it's a great plan, but it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because we always come up with some reason not to grow and to grow our giving. I mean, it works that way in congregations too, you know, we have a plan that we're gonna increase every year and then we don't, you know. We'll increase our gifts to the broader church or whatever. It doesn't happen because we have other expenses and other things that come up. And so we just stay flat and we don't grow. So it takes real discipline to be able to do it. So I used to joke that, and cold turkey tithing, just start. If anything, try it for Lent or something and just see how it goes. And I think you'll find it worked. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing and it felt good. It felt, sacrificial and felt joyful and felt proportional and, but for what it's worth on growth giving, if you can do growth giving and really disciplined and if there are partners, that you're in it together, maybe it works, but I've not experienced that in 49 years of ministry. Others, comments? Okay, I got a fun thing.
I think, before we just turn this on. All right, before this fun little piece here, let's just give a round of applause to David. David, thank you so much